conversation, and let's start by hearing about what took you to Vietnam to do this work.
Well, I think you can see from my biographical information that I didn't really follow a very traditional path into development work. In fact, the very first time I came to Vietnam, I was on holiday. It was my first trip out of Australia. I think I'd never even been on an airplane before. For Australians, Vietnam is one of the few countries that's close to us. Keep in mind, we're a very isolated country, and I thought I had a lot of Vietnamese school students at the time. I was intrigued by their culture, by their ethic, by their family histories, and so it just seemed a very simple decision. I'll go to Vietnam for my first holiday abroad, and I only planned to be here for about 10 days, and I was just absolutely hooked by the country. So I had my holiday and went back to Australia, couldn't get it out of my mind, and came back for my next holiday, the next opportunity I had, and so on and so on. And I kept coming back for holidays in Vietnam until I finally worked out it would just be cheaper to live here than keep flying over here. 2002.
So those were more, I mean, those were holidays at the beginning, but maybe you were getting more involved in local communities, or what was taking you back?
There were particular families scattered around the country. And what really appealed to me as a teacher was that at that time, Vietnam was in a fairly early stage of development. It's quite advanced now in many ways, but at that time, poverty was absolutely in your face on the streets. And children and young people would come up to me asking for help with their studies. So they were clearly financially poor, but they wanted help to learn some English words, for example, or to prepare for an exam. And to me, that was what was compelling. I felt that this was a country on the move. And I felt that when I returned to Australia, there was, that hunger or that drive for development and for change was lacking, because I was in a country that sure has many, many problems, but economically, financially, Australia is safe and stable. So there was something here in Vietnam that kept bringing me back, and it was families, specific families that I got to know around the country, that actually kept bringing me back.
So at what point then did you think you need to do more than just visit as a tourist, and you started to think about some structured engagement or work or organizing?
Well, when I first came to live here, I assumed I would end up working as a teacher. And in fact, I did. At first, I was a teacher in a master's level economics program in a university in southern Vietnam, in Ho Chi Minh City. And I was there for some months, and I loved it. I was having a great life. This was kind of what I'd come to Vietnam for. On the weekends, I'd head up a little bit to the central coast, to the beaches, and so I felt I was contributing, but also really enjoying life. And after a little while, my university sent me to where I am now, to Hanoi, where their sister center had a much bigger need for a teacher. And I didn't like Hanoi at all. I was going to be here for 3 months, 6 at the most, and then I would return to Ho Chi Minh City. That was 18 years ago, and I'm still here. That was when I started meeting street children and talking to them and getting involved in their concerns.
Okay, so you're still working for the university?
I was then. I haven't for a very, very long time now.
Okay.
But what actually happened there was that, on the weekends or after work, I'd be out on the street, maybe sitting down by the side of the road, having a coffee or having a meal, and street children would come by and just start to chat, and I would invite them to join me, and I would teach them some English. Then the next day I'd be in at the university, and I would talk to my students, to my classes, about these experiences. And these were young, growing young professionals, perhaps like the audience we have today, people who are interested in development.
Mm.
And so they would come to me saying, hey, we want to help, we want to be part of this. And so that was the spark that really lit the fire, when it was Vietnamese people and me saying, let's go out and see how we can help these kids.
Okay. And so what was the most difficult challenge then of getting the organization off the ground? I mean, when did you decide that you were going to actually create a foundation?
The greatest challenge and the best thing about it was that we had no idea what we're doing. I think if we had, maybe we wouldn't have continued. That was both advantage and disadvantage to us. The advantage was that we didn't know all the things that we weren't supposed to do. Now, as my story progresses, a few years after all of this, we did a rescue of a trafficked girl in China. Now, clearly, that was something that was not in the rule book of you should go to China and find somebody enslaved in a brothel. We weren't bound by those rules. The disadvantage, of course, was also that we didn't know the rules, and so I especially could be quite culturally insensitive at times. I didn't understand why things were done in certain ways, and I would have a certain brashness of, that's ridiculous. Let's just do this anyway. Now, over the years, that has, I guess, moderated out very, very well. And I don't think I would often be accused of that kind of insensitivity anymore. But that lack of knowledge was both to our great advantage and to our disadvantage.
Mm. So who were you working with then at this time? Who were the other people around, aside from the children you were engaging with? But who else was in the organization?
There were a couple of other foreign people. There was a Spanish man, there was another Australian woman, but actually the main people were these young Vietnamese, 25, 26-year-old people doing their masters, and then their network of friends, and so they were economic students. There was an IT guy. None of us had any idea what we were doing, but those Vietnamese people, they brought to the table their understanding of how things actually work, what the kids need, and in those early days, kids would come to me saying, "Oh, Michael, I'm in trouble at school because I couldn't pay my school fees. If I don't pay today, I'll get kicked out. I need $50." And I'd fork out $50, and my Vietnamese friends would find out later, and they're saying, "Oh, Michael, what are you doing?"
Yeah.
So, and on the other hand, they could be too tough with the kids. They'd want to really scrutinize, and their understanding of trauma and of the children's psychological development wasn't so advanced. So I was able to help them, and they were able to help me. And many of those people from those early days are still with Blue Dragon.
Mm.
In fact, the man who co-founded the organization with me, a man named Chung, he now lives in Colorado, but he's the president of Blue Dragon USA. And we're still in very close contact. And some of our early volunteers are still on staff.
Mm. So one thing that I was really interested in was, I mean, I've never been to Vietnam, so I don't know very much about Vietnam, but obviously I know that it's a communist country with a fairly authoritarian government. I'm really interested to know, what was the attitude of the authorities to these foreigners coming in and starting to work with children, and I mean, I that fascinates me. And if it was me, if it was just my show this afternoon, I would love to just talk to you about that. But I thought it's worth asking the question before we move on
Sure.
to the work.
Well, that can be a webinar part 2, David.
Yeah.
Leave that with the students to organize. In fact, the Vietnamese government is very different to what a lot of people expect. It's highly decentralized. There are 63 provinces or states, and each province is divided into districts, which are divided into communes, divided into villages, and each one has its own level of government. And then, of course, there's the central government on top of that. So decision making is not authoritarian. It's very much through committee discussion. We were unexpected, and I do honestly think that for the first few years, the view of us was probably that, don't worry too much, those guys will get bored of this and disappear eventually. But of course we didn't. Where we did start to really come under scrutiny was when we started getting involved in trafficking. And maybe one way to explain Vietnam is if I compare to Cambodia, for example. Cambodia has thousands of non-profit organizations. Vietnam has some hundreds. In Cambodia, the rules for running a non-profit are quite lax. So you have people setting up orphanages and doing things that really, you might argue, the government should be doing. Here in Vietnam, the government gives us a lot of room to move, but they don't give us free rein. And arguably, they shouldn't. I've come to respect the system over time. And I must say, at times it's been frustrating and I haven't understood, we're just doing something good. Why can't we just get on with it? But in fact, the government does want non-profits like Blue Dragon to be connected to them, so that if we pack up and disappear tomorrow, that something's left behind. So it's about building the capacity of government, improving systems. It's taken a long time for me to understand this, and in this time, of course, also the government system for non-profits has evolved, and we're in contact with the authorities all the time, as the only way to work effectively here.
I mean, most of my work has been not that far away, but in Bangladesh, and I would think that it would be very difficult. Well, first of all, Bangladesh has a huge non-profit NGO sector.
Right.
It's a very established thing, but it's also a very crowded marketplace, I suppose.
Right.
But also the government is also, it's a democratic government, but it's also has very bureaucratic and authoritarian tendencies. So I think it would be extremely difficult to navigate that. But from what I hear of Vietnam, it's a lot more, more open in a way.
In a lot of ways, yeah. I mentioned earlier our very first rescue. We went to China. We went looking for a girl who'd been missing. We found her and brought her back, and 5 other girls as well. We didn't have permission to do that. That was something we could easily have been wrapped up, kicked out at that time. Yeah. But there is a tolerance there, as long as you're really trying to do the right thing, and you've got to be here for the long term. Yeah. Development, charity work is not something you can fly in and fly out, and I'm sure that you know that very well yourself in your work.
Yeah, I mean and I think that's what's so refreshing about hearing about this, because actually the world is full of well-meaning Westerners who go on holiday to a place and start getting involved in stuff, and then a few years later, they either get into trouble or they forget about it. And I think what's so impressive about this, and I'm sure that that's one of the keys to the success that you have, is that you're in it for the long term. And the fly in, fly out stuff, as you say, doesn't work. I've got one more question about the organization just before we move on, because I really want, and I'm sure the audience really wants you to talk much more about the work that you do and some of the things that you've achieved. But I teach a course on NGOs, and in fact I was just teaching it this morning with my students, and we often start with talking about the language and the labels, and the fact that there's this bewildering world of non-profits and NGOs and charities and voluntary organizations and civil society organizations, and there are so many of these things. What do you call yourselves and why?
You might have noticed that while I've been talking so far, I've sort of flip-flopped between NGO.
Yeah, I have noticed. Yeah.
I've thrown in the word charity, development. I don't know. I don't have a good term for.
What do people say in Vietnam? How do people? What
NGOs,
language do they use?
NGOs,
yeah.
non-government organizations, which I find massively useless. Apple is a non-government organization as well.
Sure.
Saying what we're not doesn't say what we are. Non-profit, defining us economically in terms of, again, what we're not doing. I don't have a very good label. At one time, I tried to create a label for us, and I can't even remember what it was now, but it was to do with community and development. I just have to accept that we're an entity that does some charitable work, that does some development work, while trying to help as many people as possible.
Sure.
I'm open to suggestion, by the way.
Yeah. Well, in China, I think they talk about social organizations.
Right.
But I think NGO has a kind of, it implies, I think non-governmental organization, the full word maybe, as you say, tells you what you're not, and that's not much help. But NGO, I think, has become an internationally understood acronym, hasn't it? And it has its roots in the United Nations, which is why I was going to mention it to everybody here, because it's the UN society. But it was actually the United Nations that invented this, this term NGO in 1945, because it was the label that they decided to give to non-state organizations that were going to be allowed to observe in UN processes and assemblies. So in a way, it does kind of, although its literal meaning is confusing, maybe it does have a certain international currency. But it
does.
I know you want to show maybe show a video, or talk a little bit about the work. I had one more question, would be just, where do you get your resources from?
Oh, sure. So we're a registered charity in, actually we started by registering in Australia. Under Vietnamese law, we are an international NGO. Even though we started here, I live here, we had to turn up one day with a piece of paper showing which country we were from. And so we registered in Australia, but we're also registered in the UK. There's a Blue Dragon Children's Foundation UK. You can find them on Facebook.
Okay.
Shameless promotion. We're registered in the USA, where our co-founder Chun lives, and so on. Our funding really does come from all over, and this might be something, David, that you're familiar with as well. I describe our funding as a jigsaw puzzle. We start the financial year with a little bit of what we're going to need for the whole year, and we spend most of the year scrambling to put it together. So we do have money from some very large institutions, and for example, from the US State Department has been funding one part of our work. The individual contributions of families, schools, small businesses, it all adds up. We particularly encourage small monthly giving. We really see that as the future of having a community of people who are sending $5, $10 a month, for example, as a way of creating sustainability. It's great getting really big grants and donations, but the moment they stop, all of a sudden your work has to stop. And actually development isn't like that, or shouldn't be like that. We need to keep going for the long term. So we're always looking at ways that our funding can be sustainable as well. It's a complex world, that's for sure.
That's really interesting, and sounds like you've really got a good good way of approaching that. Have you ever been offered a large chunk of money by a group or an organization or an individual that you've decided that you don't want because it comes with strings or constraints?
A couple of times, but only a couple of times. I mean, there are certainly grants that we don't apply for, which is a little bit different to what you're asking. I think I can recall one time in particular where we did have someone supporting us, and he was very generous, very, very generous, but wanted to micromanage the project. And we went along with it for some time, but we could see that we weren't getting the results that we should have been getting because he wasn't letting us do what we knew we could do. So we knew a guy who we could call on to help us, and this donor, he wanted to know that guy's CV. And eventually it really did reach a point where we had to say, look, we truly appreciate all you've done, but we can't keep going like this. That's the only time it's ever been so explicit. One other time, there was an organization that kind of channels money from wealthy philanthropists to nonprofit organizations as a business model. And we felt that they were using us as a tourist stop. They were never introducing us to potential donors, never. But we were on their tourist trip, and we actually stopped that as well. And they couldn't believe that we actually said no to them. And again, they dangled, but if we keep this going, maybe one day in the future, there might be, and that's hard. And in doing that, I've got to make judgment calls of what's best for the organization. I hope I've usually got it right.
Yeah. Really interesting. So we're going to move on to questions in a short while. I know, Michael, you wanted to maybe show us a video. Do you want to go ahead and show us some stuff before we do that? I know that I'm sure that people will be really interested to hear a bit more about the organization and its current work.
Now, actually, I didn't have a video to share.
Oh, okay. It was the website.
I just wanted to share. Am I sharing that now?
Not yet.
Not yet. You're gonna have to forgive me. I'm not the most technological guy. Here we go.
Yeah. Okay. Now you're doing it. There you go.
There we are.
Yeah.
So I wanted to draw people's attention to this. We're starting a campaign at the moment. One question that often comes up, and I'm going to preempt that right now. People do want to know, well, what can I personally do? And especially when it comes to a subject like human trafficking, a very honest answer is honestly not a whole lot. What's needed is systemic change. This is a legal and criminal matter. But I also respect that people want involvement. They want to make a difference. And so Blue Dragon does try to encourage people to find positive ways to do that. We're just launching this now, and we literally just have this page up today. But we're inviting people around the world to send a message to survivors of human trafficking. And what we'll be doing at our center where survivors come after they've been rescued, we're going to be creating a mural in Vietnamese with just messages of hope and inspiration. It won't end human trafficking. It will give a psychological boost to some people. It will be some encouragement. And honestly, it will be some encouragement to my staff as well as the young people who we rescue, because they also deal with a lot of trauma and often feel alone. But I do encourage people, if you're interested in something to do, this is one small thing to actually send a message, letting trafficking survivors know that they're not alone. So that was what I was going to show. But now I'm very happy to head over to those questions, David, and see how well I can answer them.
Okay, great. Well, there's some really good questions coming in here. So I'm going to just sort of choose them in no particular order, but let's start with Ed. Ed Unwin, who says, does Michael ever struggle to separate work and personal life, being so closely attached to this cause organization?
I have done it at times. At times it honestly has been very difficult to separate out, and I've had to learn. I wish I'd learned from other people instead of doing it the hard way and learning from my own failures. Now in Blue Dragon, we have quite a big team, and it includes some Vietnamese psychologists who have also supported me and other staff to make sure we can have that separation. You know, for some years, very early on, I lived above our office, and that was a terrible idea. We did it because we had no money, but you know, I was there 24 hours a day. It's very nice, I can say, to have my own home. I have a dog. I have found ways to build routines and activities into my life that are unrelated to my work. I try meditation fairly regularly. I try to read every day. Without that separation, I would not be very effective. It's a very wise question, Ed, for you to ask. Thank you.
I mean, I was interested in what you'd said as well about this thing of not knowing what you were doing when you started. And I've talked to a lot of NGOs over the years in lots of different places, and it seems to me that, you know, the best ones nearly always start that way, because in a way you have, you know, it's actually really difficult, and you either sort of sink or swim. And if you swim, you build something that is resilient, and you build something that can last. And yet it may well also be at quite heavy personal cost. You know, it's a
yeah. I think so. And I think one reason we're successful is because I and many other people have put ourselves personally into it. But then there's a point where we have to make sure that that doesn't overwhelm us. That's the challenge. And it's a challenge every day.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, there's a nice question from Fernanda. Where did the name Blue Dragon come from?
Well, funny you should ask. I just happen to have one sitting behind here. By the way, coming up with a name for our organization was one of the most difficult things we had to do. If I flip the dragon, I'm not sure if you can see the whole dragon.
Yeah.
Bluey here is in the shape of Vietnam, a sort of a long bending S. And the blue, well, a dragon also in Eastern culture is a creature that brings luck and prosperity. If you're born in the year of the dragon, that's the best year to be born. So there's a lot of symbolism, and the blue comes from my Australian heritage. The blue sky, the blue sea, which I see as symbols of
blue mountains as well, I guess.
Yes, that's right. And I remember even as a primary school student being able to see the blue mountains from my school. So again, that symbol of being able to go, of being free. So our dragon has a lot of imagery, and was drawn by one of our street kids, a boy named Zung, who is now working for a food distribution company. So there's a lot of, yeah, it's a lovely story with our dragon.
Thank you. So there's a couple of questions coming up about the COVID crisis. So I think I'll take those two together. So one from Nirma saying, you know, it's great you've built up a sustainable model over the years. Has the COVID crisis affected your resources? And then from Dilwan Kim, how have the COVID restrictions in Vietnam affected Blue Dragon's rescue missions this year?
Well, here I go with another shameless plug. I keep a blog, and it's called lifeisalongstory.com. And I posted a blog just today about this called Grenade. Now I'll let you look that up in your own time. But what I'm saying is that the COVID crisis has actually been like throwing a grenade into an already complex situation. So our work here, there are really two main strands to our work. We go out on the streets of Hanoi looking for homeless children and getting them to safety and shelter, and hopefully back to their family. And then secondly, we work finding people who've been trafficked. And a lot of that work involves Vietnamese girls and women trafficked into China, helping them escape and bringing them back to Vietnam, where we then work with them as they recover. So straight away, I'm talking about complex situations, finding young people who are currently in crisis, and some locked physically into buildings against their will, often people who don't know where they are. When we rescue people from China, they may know that they're in China. If they know the city that they're in, we're lucky that they're even able to share that information. So it's already complex. The COVID crisis, as I say, it was like a grenade going off. For homeless children, it actually increased the number, not only of children, but adults on the streets of Hanoi. Millions of people have lost their jobs. And most of those people would be working in, they're people who've come in from the mountains or from the Delta. They've traveled in from the countryside, got a job in maybe in hospitality. And of course, those jobs are all just gone. So they go back to their countryside. When that happens, a whole family loses its income. A whole family's income for 3 generations living in a house might be reliant on one person who's been working in the city. And so at some point, maybe a child in that family has made the decision to leave home and come back into the city, hoping to beg, to find a job, anything. And homeless children in Hanoi are in very high danger of being sexually exploited. So during the lockdown that we had going back to April and May, we were fortunate in that we were able to continue our street outreach work. Our shelters had to also be locked down. So our poor kids, we have 4 shelters, 2 for boys and 2 for girls. Those poor kids were locked in to their homes, and we had to provide classes and exercise and everything you could imagine for a month or so, while we were still going out finding more children and bringing them to those shelters. And now, even though lockdown has long ended, we still are finding about double the number of children on the street compared to the number we would normally find. So that is still quite elevated. Rescues of people in China, you could imagine how complex that became. Of course, China was where the virus was first detected. Vietnam's border with China closed. We still have been able to rescue people, but to give you an indication of how things have changed this year, last year we rescued 114 people from human trafficking, and we helped another 45. So that 45, they were people maybe rescued by the Chinese police and handed over the border to us. So far this year, we've only rescued 59 people from China. So we're way down, but we've assisted more than 160 people. So the Chinese police have been rescuing a lot more and handing them to us. We've also been dealing with trafficking within the country, often teenage girls, 14, 15 years old, taken from their villages on the promise of jobs and sold into brothels. So there are new forms of trafficking. On the weekend, we rescued 6 women who were being trafficked to China for the purpose of surrogacy. So 4 of the women were pregnant. 2 of them were going to be impregnated, and we were able to intervene before they reached the border. So there are new forms of trafficking. It's taking different shapes. The traffickers have new tricks. COVID has been extremely disruptive. So we've had to be as agile as the traffickers to keep on top of that.
Okay, great. No, that's a really interesting answer. And I hate to keep moving on to more subjects, but there's a lot of really good questions coming in now. So I'm just going to throw a few more out there. There's a couple of questions about the government, which are interesting. So one of them says, if there are times, Tanya says, if there are times when there's been different approaches or opinions between Blue Dragon and the government, how have you dealt with that? And then another one from, I think, Thu, saying, has the government collaborated or supported Blue Dragon in any shape or form?
Yeah, working as an NGO in Vietnam is quite different to being an NGO in other countries. Here, success relies on working with the government. So, when we started doing those rescues, and perhaps this answers Tanya's question, our first rescues were of children who were trafficked domestically within Vietnam. Children from the central provinces trafficked to the southern city of Ho Chi Minh City, put to work in sweatshops. Now, at that time, Vietnamese law didn't recognize that as human trafficking. And so we turned up and we would talking to families in the central provinces. Then with their permission, we would go to the south, we would find those factories, we would bring those children home. We were talking about human trafficking and slavery. And quite honestly, the government thought we were just being disruptive, that we were making problems, and they were really concerned. And for some time, we were not cooperating. We were sort of at each other's necks all the time. The resolution to that came when we said to one particular official, come with us and see for yourself. We'll book your flight, we'll put you in a hotel, but come and have a look so you can see. He did that, and we never had any trouble in that province again. So it was you could argue we should have done that 2 years earlier, right? And yeah, we should have. At the same time, we did win some respect by continuing to do that, even when everyone was saying, you're crazy, this problem doesn't exist. That problem, by the way, now doesn't exist. We actually stopped that form of trafficking by continually going back to those sweatshops and getting children out, and by working with the schools in the source province where the children were being taken from. Schools, local government, the women's union, directly with families. So when we brought everyone together on it, we were able to get an amazing result, which is a lot nicer than our scrappy early days of fighting all the time and trying to go against the system. I learned things the hard way.
There's an interesting question here from Alexan saying, how do you deal with finding a balance between educating and not imposing Western values? Yeah,
that's so important. Look, we've had one example of that just recently, in fact, where we do now work around the country. I'm speaking to you from Hanoi, the capital city, but we work all around Vietnam. Now, in one village up in a really mountainous area called Dien Bien, we were finding that a lot of children were getting sick. Now, we come across that problem because, when we go and rescue someone who's been trafficked, or we find out about trafficking in a certain village, we ask, what's going on here? Why is there a problem? And we'll hear people say things like, well, I had to travel away from home to work because my children are sick and I didn't have money for hospital. I was desperate, someone made me an offer. Okay, so we go to the village and we try to find out, why are children here getting sick? And the community, they're what we call ethnic minority people. Vietnam has about 13 million ethnic minority people in a population of 100 million. And there's about 60 ethnic minority groupings. Most people have heard of the Hmong, but there are about 60 more ethnic minority groupings with their own culture, their own language. So we're not saying here, Blue Dragon needs to respect the one Vietnamese culture and work within that. There are many. In this particular village, the family was saying, well, when my child gets sick, we boil up some locusts and feed him the water, because that's what we've done for generations. It would be very easy to say, look, that's clearly ridiculous. That's not going to work at all. This is what you should do. what we find is that we can very often work with families saying, that's not harmful at all. And if you think that's of benefit, continue. There's something else we'd like you to try. And then show people that way. Going back to the wording of your question, it's very much about showing and walking alongside people, not just telling them. I can also say, I'm not the guy anymore who goes out onto the streets looking for homeless children. I don't go to do rescues. I don't go to the villages and talk with families directly. I do with my staff from time to time, but it's them, Vietnamese people who speak the local languages, who have a connection, a relationship with people, and they can do that work. That's a respectful approach, a critically important question, and I appreciate that you've asked that.
Another very practical question is from PA, who says, how do you actually rescue people? Is it a process that involves police cooperation? It must be quite dangerous.
I have to be a little bit limited in what I say. I'll answer some parts of that. Whenever we can, yep, we work with the police. But there are cases where we cannot. So typically what we would do is set up an escape. For example, and if I take a step back, Blue Dragon's involvement with these rescues is where someone has called for help from China. So we're not going kicking down doors saying, if there's anyone here, we'll get you out. It's not that at all. Someone in China, a Vietnamese girl or woman, has called home. She's called her mother saying, Mum, help me. I went with a friend. I thought I was going for a job. I'm trapped. Mum calls the police and the police will investigate. They might also suggest the family contact us. We then establish contact with that person because if she's called her mum, she must have a mobile telephone. So we communicate with her. Through a process of investigation, we work out where she is. And finally, we get someone with a car to that location. Most people in slavery at some point have some element of freedom. It might be if they're working in a brothel, for example, they might have to go out sometimes to get their hair done or to get their nails done. They'll be under guard, but even as time goes by, the guards will get lax, you know, they'll be sitting there playing on their mobile phone while she's inside getting her hair done. If they've been sold as a forced bride, the family that has bought them will eventually want them to go to the market and get the vegetables for dinner or take the rubbish out. So we find and exploit those opportunities. So we will communicate a message to say, we're down the street in the yellow car. We're going to be here until you get in the back. And then we run away. And that sounds like an insane approach. We're coming up to our 1000th rescue. So it works. It's non-confrontational. We do not fight. We do not try to be heroes. It's about an escape. And we then get the person back to the Chinese-Vietnamese border and report to the police.
That's incredible and really impressive. I think we're getting near the end of the time, and there's a great question from Carla here, which I was sort of saving for towards the end, which is, how do you think Blue Dragon is going to evolve over the next few years? Are there any new plans and ideas?
I love that question because I'm a terrible planner, and I've come to give it a nice name to explain why I'm such a bad planner, and that is that it's an evolutionary growth that we go through. It's organic, and I've come to embrace organic growth and organic development. What I can say is Blue Dragon has two overriding objections, and nearly everything we do, perhaps everything, works towards these two objectives. One is that here in Hanoi, we want every single street child to have access to someone to care for them. Now that might be Blue Dragon, and I have staff out on the street right now looking for homeless children. but it might also be people from other organizations or from government departments, from voluntary associations. So we have a role there of not only doing that work ourselves, and normally we have two teams of two pairs go out each night, but also working with those other agencies that are interested in this work, but not sure what to do, and helping them find their way, learning with them and from them as well. So that's our first objective. We're a long way from that. There are a lot of street children here who we don't meet, or we meet long after they've been abused or they've been on the streets for a long time. So we're continuing to build up that network and that part of our service. On the issue of human trafficking, I've got more of an audacious goal. I want to see the end of the trafficking of Vietnamese people. I mentioned earlier that we actually stopped the trafficking of children into sweatshops, into the garment sweatshops. Now, it was a particular trade. We haven't stopped all trafficking of all children into all slave labor. We stopped a particular form of that trafficking. And we think if we did that, why can't we find ways to do more? What's with human trafficking? There's a real gap in understanding and knowledge of how to end it. If you get onto Google after this webinar and type in how to end human trafficking, there's very, very little information. What you'll come up with is NGOs like mine asking for donations. In other words, we're throwing up our hands saying, we don't know, but we think awareness raising might help, or rescues might help. So we're actively trying to build up a body of knowledge at the moment. There's one province here in Vietnam where we're working very specifically, where we're putting everything we know, everything we've done into this province, working with the government, keeping children in schools, helping families learn organic corn growing, anything that's helpful. And we're measuring it. We're measuring the impact of what happens when we do that. We're measuring the cost of doing it. And where that's leading to, and it's probably a good 5-year project, it's leading to us having a set of knowledge that we can share with the Vietnamese government to say, if you do this thing, this is how it impacts human trafficking, and this is what it would cost the state budget. Once we have that body of knowledge, of course, we're not finished. Then there's the question of, can we scale that up? Can we get it to other parts of the country? Would it work in other parts of the country, or would it need to be modified? So the fight against human trafficking really is a long-term one. I say we want to end human trafficking. I don't think I'm going to live that long. But whoever is running Blue Dragon in 50 years, 100 years' time, maybe they will say, we've done it. That's my audacious goal.
That's great. And there's a very quick question there from Ed, who says, what kind of difference do individual donations, perhaps from students, make for the charity?
That's a very thoughtful question, Ed, and I swear I didn't plant that question. I can say there's no donation that doesn't help. It is critical. It really is a case that the more resources we have, the more we can help. What I do encourage you, especially as a student, students have it hard, and I know you don't have money to freely give away. Be selective, and whether it's an organization like Blue Dragon or Oxfam, which I know David's heavily involved in, or a local charity there, make sure that you know what your money's going towards. And if you're happy for your money to go more generally to sort of just the running of the organization, that's also great. But you need to think about what you want your money to do. And whether it's $5 or $100, you should get some kind of feedback from the organization. Not necessarily a detailed report on your $5 did this exact thing, but you should hear from them that it's going towards a particular part of their work. and have some respectful communication from the organization around that. Giving is a very personal thing. There's no clear set of rules. You have your own rules for giving. Give to what you believe in and what you think would make a difference.
Okay, well, I'm going to hand back to Amali now, but just before I do, I'd just like to thank you, Michael, on behalf of everybody here for telling us about your incredibly inspiring work, and also for sharing it so openly and dealing with the questions in such a clear and straightforward way. I think we've all learned a huge amount. So thank you very much for that. And Amali,
It's been a pleasure.
Let me hand you back. And
thank you, David.
Thank you, Amali, for organising this.
Hi everyone, I'm back again. So we thought this event would be a great way to launch our fundraising campaign. So as some of you may know, the UN Society has 2 partner charities and we fundraise for both of them. And so this is kind of our launch for our fundraising activity for Blue Dragon. So I've just posted a link in the chat. If you want to make a donation and help make a difference and contribute to Blue Dragon's work, please go click through to that link and donate whatever you can, if it's £1 or even if it's £5. Every little bit of money makes a big difference. We will also be having more fundraising campaigns throughout the year. Some of them will be focused on specific aspects of Blue Dragon's work, such as raising money for dignity bags, which are essential bags of essential kit for survivors of human trafficking that Blue Dragon gives to the survivors they've rescued. And we'll be having a target of around 5 bags that we want to raise money to. So please look out for that. We will also have more fun fundraising initiatives such as a quiz night, maybe some writing competitions. So definitely things that are very interactive, very social, but also things that you can improve your skills and get a couple of awards for. So do follow our Facebook page and stay tuned for that. And thank you again to David and Michael for being here. I know the 2 of you are extremely busy and we really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us and talk to us a little bit about Blue Dragon. So thank you very much for that. And thank you to everyone who attended the event.
Yeah, thank you. What a pleasure.
All right, thanks everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks again, David.
Thank you.